Welcome, friends. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Repro Film Podcast as part of the Repro Periodical Newsletter, where each month we share a short film and conversation centered around a theme. May is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and given that the majority of our Repro Film team are part of the AAPI community, myself included, we fully realize the importance and timeliness of looking at the way repro health and justice impacts AAPI folks. This month, we're featuring the stunning short film Cold War and a short interview with writer and director Lilly Hu, who is originally from China. Cold War was her award-winning AFI thesis film, which is about a young Chinese high school student experiencing an unplanned pregnancy while studying abroad alone in Los Angeles. Cold War follows Bei Bei, a.k.a. Katie, as she negotiates her own unwanted pregnancy in an American culture she doesn't fully understand. In the second half of this episode, I'll be speaking with Seri Lee, the National Campaign and Membership Director for the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum, also referred to in our interview by its acronym NAPAWF. Seri and I talk about the scary time we are living in, staring down the barrel of Roe v. Wade being overturned, what reproductive justice is, and why it is important for the AAPI community, and what we as everyday people can do, even in small ways, to ensure abortion access, reproductive health, and human rights is a reality we can all work toward. It is a time filled with uncertainty right now, but as Seri quotes Black American abolitionist Mariame Kaba in our interview, having hope is a discipline. I love that quote so much. And we will not give up. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Lilly Hu, thank you so much for joining me today. It's great to be speaking with you.
Hello, nice to speak with you too.
Well, I know we're in different time zones and everything feels very global and far apart, but also very connected with Zoom, which is how we're recording this podcast interview. So thank you. I know it's early morning for you. It's late evening for me. I appreciate your time greatly. So I first want to talk about the story behind Cold War. Hopefully all our listeners have had a chance to watch it. If not, the link will be in the show notes. But tell me first how the story came about. How did the whole idea come about?
So it's my AFI thesis. So we kind of have to submit our story before we start the whole thesis production, which is like the whole second year of our school. I've always wanted to make a story about young girl having to get abortion. But my story was set in China before. It's based on some personal experience and a lot of like my friends' experience. Like for example, the girl with the pink hair in Cold War was inspired by a girl that's in my middle school who was like a year below me. I think I was 14 years old and she should be like 13 or 14. And she experienced her experience was shown like exactly the same in Cold War. So that was terrifying in a middle school in China. So that left like a huge impression on me. So I was like, I have to make something about this. And I just think like it's just such a shame for young girls to get pregnant in China. Like China's situation is a little different than America. But yeah, it just has to do with a woman's own mind and her body. So yeah, that's how I came to this story. I just wanted to say something about what young woman has to go through.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into your upbringing in China and talking about the reproductive access and the culture there. And, we'll talk about America as well. But just for listeners who aren't familiar, can you explain what AFI is and what you did there?
Oh, AFI is American Film Institute. And so I finished my MFA degree there. I just got it last year in directing. So we have 6 disciplines. And it's like directing, cinematography, producing, editing, screenwriting, and production design. In the first year, we do cycles. We do 3 cycles together with different team members. But a directing fellow only directs. So I think that's what's good about it. And the second year, we will form a whole team to do a thesis film together in the whole year. So my team and I did Cold War together.
Awesome.
And then we graduated.
I mean, what a way to graduate, having this amazing film to show the world then as well, and to start your directing career in this way. I want to talk about how the film deals with themes of shaming and the silence or secrecy that so often accompanies decisions around pregnancy, especially for young women, like you were just describing, both in China as well as here in the US. Why was it important for you to show these themes through a protagonist, a main character, who was also straddling the different cultural barriers?
Yeah, so I think in China, it's mostly because pregnancy is always connected with sex. Sex is always a shameful thing in Chinese culture, especially if you are like an underage, underage girl, if you're not adult. So like if young people are having sex and they make mistakes, the girl gets pregnant and it's the girl who gets all the shame.
Right.
And all the like physical pain. So it's like that for this Chinese young girl. So in China, it's very weird. It's like if Katie was in China, then the problem she will get is her parents her family will probably like, you can't tell anyone about this, and don't even think about having this kid. You should just abort it because everyone will think you're poor. Basically, that's what's going to happen in China. But I know it's very different in America because of the policy and culture. So we all have our own difficulties. And about the culture thing is, well, AAPI thesis has to shoot in Los Angeles. So I just think I'd have to adapt this story into like American background. So, and I came to America like when I went to AAPI. So that's the first time I went to the States. And well, as an Asian woman, it's just, it's difficult for us than those native speakers. Well, it's just basically something I experienced when I lived in LA and when I was in AAPI. And it's, well, you feel lonely among different people, but it's not anyone's fault. It's just a natural feeling you will have. And yeah, it's amazing how language it does to people. It's like, especially for like an introvert girl like Katie, it's very hard for her to blend in those people who can just talk very freely with each other. And she, like, it takes her a long time to put together words to communicate with others. Yeah. And she really doesn't like it almost feels like people are wasting time on her. So yeah, it's difficult, but I think it gets better when you get older. You kind of you realize that difference you have with people and you accept it, and you just you know, like, you have to do things to get better. So, but it's very difficult for a 15-year-old girl.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially studying abroad as a teenager, that you could see that was very hard for Katie in the film, you know, trying to fit in with friends and also go through her own unexpected pregnancy experience. Although you made a short film, you know, I was watching until the end, but it ended and I just wanted to see more. I'm like, hang on a second, there should be more. I want to see the rest of this film. So I guess, especially given what's happening in the US with abortion access right now, and also what's happening with China, you know, with the change in the two-child policy and, you know, different policies around maternity leave, it feels like it's such a a good topic to explore through film. So will there be a Cold War feature film at some stage?
Yeah, I have a few feature projects at hand that I'm developing, but I haven't really thought about, because I'm just trying to focus on making Chinese stories at this point. And if Cold War is going to be a feature, it's probably going to be a Chinese story. Not going to be America, probably.
Right.
So, but yeah, I when the Supreme Court thing happened, I was, yeah, I mean, like all the women should be like really upset, because, well, it's absurd. I was talking about this with a lot of people around me, and well, I just know so many women have to go through dangerous abortions, illegal abortions, to just try to have a normal life. It's just so unfair. Like, men just are so free. And it's the same thing in China. It's like the third child policy.
No, it's a third child. Okay.
Have 3 children, right? But my friends are like the same age as me, like 20, 26, 27, or a little bit over 30. They're just like, they have no intention of having children, because it's just so bad. My friends get pregnant and then she's fired immediately. And I just think, I always say this, when, like, if they're not making tampons free, then we have no responsibility to do anything. It's like, we have this every month, but we still have to pay a lot for it.
Yeah, a luxury tax. They're often taxed as luxury goods. It's like, it's not a luxury to menstruate. Right. It's painful. It can be a nuisance. It interferes with our everyday life. And it's just, you're right. I mean, these things are connected to so many issues like maternity leave, menstruation, health, and, if there's no protections there's just no attack on men's bodily freedom in any way. There's no laws telling them what they can and can't do. And it's the complete opposite for women. And I'm sure, being from China, seeing the evolution of going from the one-child policy and the impact on so many women and families, and now having it changed to the third-child policy, and the real push for women to have more babies and take maternity leave. It's that idea of the government. I mean, similar to what's happening here. The government is trying to control what you can and can't do, how you plan your family, who you have sex with, what kind of relationship you're in. And it just, that there's no freedom in that at all. And it's different in China, but it's the same. There's different sides of the same coin.
Yeah, because we just have like different situations in 2 countries, but it's like the problems are the same.
We don't always find the words to share our stories, but art, poetry, filmmaking is a great way to talk about difficult subjects like miscarriage or abortion. And, May is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And, we wanted to highlight as many Asian American and Pacific Islander creators and organizations and content as much as possible, especially related to reproductive rights and abortion access. So I'd love to hear from you, what does it mean to be a filmmaker from China talking about abortion and, making this film in America and seeing everything that's going on with abortion? What does it mean to you as a filmmaker to be able to talk about this through your films?
Well, I'm very lucky to be able to do that, because a lot of people just can't do that. I always just really want to tell Chinese stories, even though I didn't really achieve that in thesis. I'm going to, that's my goals now, like feature films, because, well, the Chinese situation, like the censorship exists.
Yeah.
But I just feel we have so many people, and like the interesting stories, the interesting people I met are always Chinese. I mean, because I lived there longest, and I just feel there's so much to show. And there's so much like misunderstanding or like just not knowing. And I feel, yeah, it's because of my experience or background, is that's what I want to do. It's kind of a responsibility thing. If I don't try to do it, who else? And I'm basically, I only do write films that's female leading. The lead is always a woman. I just think being a woman is very hard. You have to do so much more than a man to just be kind of have an equal rights with them. So yeah, that's my goal as a filmmaker, just to do like Chinese woman movies.
For those people and audiences and our Repro listeners who are going to be watching it for the first time, what do you want them to think about after watching Cold War?
Well, I'm sure they'll feel very depressed after watching my film. And that's kind of my intention when I was making it. So I think out of this depression, I hope they could just reflect on people around us that are really going through a difficult time. Maybe it's not that obvious. Maybe just be a little nicer to people. I really want them to realize it's not that fun for a woman to get pregnant when she doesn't really want to.
Well, we're going to put the link to Cold War in our show notes, and people can get it in the Repro periodical in your email inbox. But Lilly Hu, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Thank you.
Welcome to the podcast, Seri. It's great to be speaking with you today. And before we dive into our conversation, can you tell me a little bit about NAPAWF and what you do there?
Yeah, so NAPAWF stands for the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum. We are the leading multi-issue national community organizing and policy advocacy organization that builds power with Asian American and Pacific Islander women and girls. And so that's a lot, so let me break it down. We build power with Asian American and Pacific Islander women and girls. So what that means is that we, advocate for our lives, for our families, for our communities, so that we all can exercise agency. And we do this using what we call a reproductive justice framework, working on specifically 3 issue areas. So that includes reproductive rights and health, immigrant rights and racial justice, and then finally, economic justice. We are a national organization, so we have, we have offices based in DC, Chicago, New York, Atlanta, and then opening new offices in Tampa and Houston, which is really exciting.
Oh, great. Yeah.
And then we also have 8 chapters across the country, as well as more than 600 members nationwide. To talk a little bit about what I do at NAPAWF, I serve as the National Campaign and Membership Director. So I oversee our national organizing programs. Specifically, that includes overseeing our field programs in Florida and Texas, as well as a few other states, and then our national campaigns and membership program across the country. So I oversee a lot of work from the bird's eye view, as well as getting information of what's happening on the ground. And so that can be kind of an exciting position to be in, knowing what's happening on the ground and being able to connect that with, what's happening in Houston, with what's happening in Tampa, what's happening in Minnesota, with what's happening in New York. So it's really exciting to be able to see all these different connections.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I'm sure you're very busier than ever right now, given what's happening on the ground, which we'll get into in a moment. And I believe you guys are the only AAPI focused repro justice organization in the country. Is that correct?
Yes, on the national level.
National level. Great. So yeah, it's a real honor to be speaking with you today, especially as May is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. We've been centering our Repro periodical content around this theme and wanted to talk with you about this So why is reproductive justice and freedom, and specifically abortion access, which is, the topic that we're really focused on right now, why is this important to your organization and the AAPI community?
For sure. So I'll start off with just giving a little bit of history about reproductive justice, which I love to talk about.
Yes, please.
So in 1994, a group of Black women who named themselves Women of African Descent for Reproductive Justice, they were actually a group of, Black women in Chicago, which is something that I really love talking about, being that I'm from Chicago. But this group of Black women coined the term reproductive justice in recognition of the ways in which the mainstream reproductive rights movement did not represent women of color's lived experiences and needs. So, there's reproductive health, which is oftentimes, thinking about providing direct service for how people can access reproductive health care, including access to abortion, access to contraception, all of that. There's reproductive rights, which is focused on, legal and policy advocacy, and most of the time is the realm of what we're thinking about with the ACLU and lawyers, policymakers, elected officials, decision makers in that capacity. And in this case, what we're talking about is reproductive justice, which is a movement that centers the most marginalized. And I think what's really important when we talk about reproductive justice is that it uses a human rights framework. So oftentimes when we talk about reproductive rights, we use a legal framework. We talk about the legal right to abortion, but reproductive justice goes further than that. Roe v. Wade has been the law of the land for the past 49 years, since 1973. And even with the legal right to abortion, that hasn't actually meant that, everyone could access abortion for many different reasons. And I think that's, the big conversation that we'll be having today is all the ways in which, even with Roe, people have not been able to access abortion care and other reproductive health care and other ways that they need, or like other resources that they need in order for them to, thrive in safe and sustainable communities. And so the reproductive justice framework is really rooted in three main principles. It is an individual's human right to, one, have a child and decide the conditions under which they give birth. Two, to not have a child, including access to all options for ending or preventing pregnancy while being treated with dignity. And then third, parent the children they have in safe, supportive communities free from violence and oppression. And there's one more angle to reproductive justice, which is to just make sure that all individuals can be able to assert bodily autonomy. And so what does reproductive justice mean for Asian American and Pacific Islander communities? And so we believe at NAPAWF that reproductive justice for AAPI women and girls will be achieved when we have the economic, social, and political power to make decisions about our own bodies, families, and communities. And so using our reproductive justice framework helps us to recognize the intersecting identities of AAPI women and girls, which includes ethnicity, immigration status, education, sexual orientation, gender identity, and then disability or ability when addressing our social, economic, and healthcare needs. And so there's a few different examples, for us to think about what reproductive justice looks like for AAPI communities. So one example might be you have a Burmese woman who makes 50 cents to every dollar a white man makes, who has a sick child, but her workplace does not provide paid family leave. That is a reproductive justice issue. Another example is you might have a Korean woman who earns low wages, who needs access to Medicaid to pay for her birth control, but due to her immigration status, she has to wait 5 years for affordable contraception. That's a reproductive justice issue. And then the last example we might want to think about is we have a young AAPI person who's growing up in a culture where sexual and reproductive health is a taboo topic, but they need comprehensive sex education in their school, not the shaming and oppressive abstinence-based programs that they receive in health class. That is also a reproductive justice issue. And so really anything can be framed as a reproductive justice issue beyond abortion, beyond reproductive rights and health, beyond, thinking about making sure that our families stay together, making sure that we, have, livable wages and that we can thrive and provide for our families and provide for ourselves, making sure that, we live in safe and sustainable communities. And that's really what reproductive justice is about, is making sure that we have access to all the resources that we need in order for us to make critical decisions about our lives, our families, and communities, as well as to just be able to live and thrive in safe and sustainable communities.
I mean, you think that would be a no-brainer for every human being, but sadly, it is not. And thank you for concisely breaking the difference down between the rights, the justice, and the healthcare frameworks. That's super, super important, especially with this conversation and, the larger conversations we're having around access to repro health right now in America. And I love that last example that you used, because this month we featured a short film called Cold War by Lilly Hu, which told the story of an immigrant Chinese student in an American high school who finds herself unexpectedly pregnant and has to navigate that situation, as well as the multiple cultural barriers she personally straddles. It's a compelling and beautifully shot film and so nuanced. And, those intersections are there that you just mentioned before, Seri. So from an organizational standpoint, how can films and media be a powerful way to have conversations about the intersection of culture and abortion access and reproductive justice in America right now?
Yeah, I love this question so much. That's making me tear up a little bit.
Oh.
But I just think that, media shapes our understanding of reality and affects reality in so many different ways. Like, representation is so powerful, and particularly in AAPI communities, sexual and reproductive health is very stigmatized. It's a taboo topic to talk about. And the reason why I'm tearing up a little bit, just thinking about how to answer your question, is, I'm thinking about my own experiences growing up. So I grew up in a working class mixed status Korean household. And, my parents have always, had politicized conversations with me from the get-go. Like, the first thing I distinctly remember from elementary school is my parents talking to me about Japanese occupation in Korea.
Wow.
And talking about, for example, like the comfort women issue. And so, like, I've always had these politicized conversations with my parents, but, growing up, they were still pretty conservative. Like, I remember in middle school, I would have start to broach the conversation of abortion and LGBTQ rights with my dad. And because we were talking about it in school, and I just wanted to see, like, how does he stand on these issues?
What do you think?
Right. Yeah. And he just, was anti-abortion, like anti-LGBTQ rights. And that just like really created a drift in our relationship because, I was just pro human rights, like these things are basic human rights that, everyone should be able to live with dignity and in safety. And so that was 15 years ago. And during middle school and high school, my relationship with my parents was pretty rocky, not just like on politics, but just in our personal lives too. So thinking about, this, about the short film, like Cold War, like I can, like in my head, I can like perfectly imagine like what that looks like, just having to navigate that situation and you not knowing, like where your parents stand, and of course, just all those cultural barriers and the stigma that you're encountering as you're navigating this really, really hard situation. But I think that's where media is so powerful because it opens up conversations and helps us to see the world in a different way. And so, back to my own story, like thinking about like from 15 years ago in middle school to now, I've seen just a world of difference in terms of like where my parents stand now on these issues and even around organizing. And I think that change in their mindset really came because of representation and, abortion, like being out there openly in the discourse. And so with my dad, for example, 15 years ago, who's anti-abortion, but now, through the work that he's seeing me do, he's really seeing my work as a force of positive change. And now sees me kind of as an expert now.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That was going to be my next question. What does he think now of the work that you do?
Right. Yeah. So he now he openly identifies as a feminist, which is really great. He regularly talks about different politicians. He'll be isn't Elizabeth Warren great? How do you feel about Elizabeth Warren? And I'll be
I love your dad.
Let's talk about it. And then even most recently with the leak of the Dobbs, majority opinion, I, talked about that with my dad, and he was like, oh yeah, that's horrific. People should be able to access abortions. That's just a no-brainer. And in the back of my mind, I was thinking, you weren't thinking about that 15 years ago.
Right.
No hard feelings now. And I think, really what's helped him to change his mindset is, again, seeing representation.
Yes.
People talk about abortion, about sex, about reproductive health care in, ways that are out in the open, but also in ways that are in language and culturally competent, or culturally sensitive ways.
Yes.
And so particularly in Korea, where, my parents are from, of course, there's still a lot of, very conservative,
gender
justice discourse out there.
Right. Especially with the recent election.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And yet, at the same time, what we're seeing that's really exciting in terms of the representation front is that people and, media is really openly talking about sex, abortion, reproductive health care, reproductive rights in ways that, would be unimaginable 10, 15 years ago. There is this show called Our Blues. It's a K-drama on Netflix. And actually, one of the characters, is, one of the two characters that the story kind of focuses on are, two teenagers, one of which, is pregnant. And it's, talking through abortion, about teenage pregnancy, about parenthood in ways that would have been unimaginable 10, 15 years ago.
Wow.
And there's actually even outside of those representations, my mom is watching a show right now about teenage mothers. And that also talks about, parenthood, about, teen pregnancy, about the ways that, Korean society has failed young people. And so that's also really interesting to see as well, as just the ways in which how powerful representation can be in, helping us move the needle and push conversations forward. And then, so that's a bit about my dad, but, with my mom, that's actually been more interesting for me to hear about, because in some ways she hasn't been openly, she hasn't been very open with me about her political views, but I had an inkling that she's never been pro-abortion until maybe a few years ago, and particularly in the past several months. And so when the news about Senate Bill 8, so SB 8 in Texas, the 6-week abortion ban, went out back in September, and I started talking about that with my mom, and she actually heard about that in the Korean news, which is really interesting.
That's how much of a big deal it is.
Right. And so when I first had, talked about this, about SB 8 with her, she actually shared with me her abortion story, and I had never had an abortion. And so that's another way that I think representation is so powerful, because it really does help us to see the world in a different way, and for us to imagine what the world could be like if, we had in place systems and resources where people can be able to, actually make critical decisions about their own lives, families, and communities for themselves. And then also for us to reimagine and to dream of a world in which we can openly talk about these things, because we do in our communities, but it's just oftentimes using coded language or talking about it in roundabout ways. And so making sure that we have these conversations openly is so important. And I know that's been the case for myself, but for so many of our members and organizers at NAPAWF, they've also had similar experiences too, where their work has been a positive change of representation for the people in their community, for them to see like, wow, like this type of work is possible. Because we're talking about, reproductive justice here, which is, something that our communities don't often openly talk about. But we're also talking about organizing, community organizing. That's something that oftentimes, within our communities, we don't see that as a viable way to make change or even to make, something out of ourselves. And I think that's also really important, that there's a representation we see in media and in film, but then there's also the representation of just us doing things, of getting out there.
Yes, you see them.
Right, in real life. And I think that's also so powerful too.
Yeah, I love that story about your family. I mean, what a testament to the work you're doing, but also, like you said, representation and that whole idea of you can't be what you can't see, like Marion Wright Edelman so famously said, seeing that person out there and knowing it's possible for me, or this is more common that we think in terms of abortion stories, like with your mom. And wow, that's so powerful. Thank you for sharing that. I really love that. I'd love to talk about the most common misconceptions or stigma that AAPI, repro leaders, and experts have to fight back against when it comes to anti-abortion policy. I think a lot of our listeners are familiar with, the junk science and the non-medical basis of a lot of anti-abortion laws, but there really is a specific stigma toward AAPI community folks that I'd love for you to share, that we need to be more aware of.
Yeah, I think the major one is that AAPIs are, passive politically, that we're politically apathetic. So that stems from the model minority myth. But then in addition to that, another layer is that we are conservative and or, politically apathetic. So we don't support abortion access, which the data shows us is not true. So 7 out of 10 Asian American and Pacific Islanders support abortion access. And NAPAWF has actually done its own polling for the past 2 election cycles. And in the 2020 election, we actually have polling that shows us that 85% of AAPI women support abortion access.
Wow.
So we huge. Overwhelmingly support abortion.
Yes, that's really important to know. And, policymakers and organizers should really factor that data in when, trying to reach as many people as possible, that it has to be intersectional. Otherwise, I guess that's a whole framework why, adopting a reproductive justice framework is important, because it's not just about the legality, it's about how do you bring in communities and how do you ensure that holistic human rights is a reality for everyone. So yeah, that's really important. Okay, so the elephant in the room, we've mentioned it once or twice, but the Dobbs v. Jackson Supreme Court case, and we're staring down the barrel of Roe v. Wade being overturned. First, can you tell us how NAPAWF has been preparing for a post-Roe reality? A lot of repro organizers and organizations I speak to are saying that they've been preparing for this for a while, for many years. So I'd love to hear from you how you all have been doing that.
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely want to echo what they've been saying too, that, for quite a while, we've been anticipating that, this was going to happen. I mean, this has been part of the opposition's playbook for years and years and years, like shutting down abortion access on the hyper-local, local, state, and the national level too, and how that's interconnected with so many struggles, not just related to reproductive rights, but thinking about LGBTQ rights, thinking about voting.
Yes.
Rights, that is all part of the same playbook. So really, trying to think about how do we prepare for post-Roe reality. I think I just want to start off by saying that it's really scary. At least, definitely for me. I mean, I was born in 1998, and so I've always lived in, and I'm from Chicago, so I've always, lived in a world or, around me that, with the legal right to abortion. And, with Roe v. Wade, most likely being overturned, sometime in the next month. That's really scary. And so I just want to first off just, validate what listeners might be feeling right now, because it is really scary and there's a lot of uncertainty in the air. And at the same time, now more than ever, it's so important that, people, particularly those folks who haven't been as engaged in, reproductive justice or rights or health work, to really listen to, the folks who are most directly impacted, which really means, communities on the ground, but also folks who had abortions, and also listen to the folks who've been doing work on the ground. So that includes organizers, it includes independent clinics and providers, and that includes abortion funds as well. At NAPAWF, we've really been engaging in 4 things. So investing in state-based work, so particularly in Georgia, Florida, and Texas, to push out pro-abortion messaging through our voter engagement work. And so our Georgia and Florida programs have already begun with doing voter engagement work. And right now, and during the month of May, what they're doing is actually surveying our communities on the phones about what their attitudes toward abortion is, so that we can actually integrate, the results of, where people stand on the issue of abortion to our GOTV, or Get Out the Vote scripts. And so that's really exciting work that's happening right now. We'll be likely doing the same in Texas. Beyond that, engaging in both defensive and proactive work. And so on the defensive side, our Florida chapter has been, actively fighting back against the 15-week abortion ban that unfortunately passed, a few months ago, or actually a month ago, but will be enacted on July 1st. And while, we weren't able to win that fight, I think the fact that we were able to bring in so many people and to mobilize and organize them is really important. And, that just helps us to build power so that we could incrementally create the landscape that we need to have in order for us to move a more progressive agenda in the state. And so it's really we lost that fight, and also there's some wins that we can identify and how we've pushed the needle forward, and how we can learn from the work that we've done, so that, in the near future, that we can actually build a more progressive Florida where, we actually do, care for reproductive freedom and can be able to see that in policy as well. In the proactive work, really a lot of also really exciting work happening there. So our New York chapter has been co-leading a campaign with the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Justice, so their New York branch there, as well as other reproductive rights groups. But right now, they've actually, in the past month, have been able to pass the Reproductive Equity Act, which essentially, would be able to allow private insurance coverage in the state of New York to cover abortion care. And so that's really exciting. There's a lot of other really exciting wins recently in the past few years that our New York chapter has helped us to win as well. So that includes, actually on the city level to pass a resolution to ban any type of, discriminatory practices in banning abortions. And so for AAPI communities in particular, that includes sex-selective abortion bans. So, banning abortions on the basis of, of sex. And that's something that is really connected to stereotypes about our communities that aren't necessarily true. And so that is actually something that they were able to win recently in the past few years on the city level. For, thinking about outside of the work, we also want to make sure that we're really strengthening our partnerships. And so that looks like partnering with abortion funds and providers. And so, for example, in Florida, we've been working, our Florida chapter is based out of Tampa. And so we've been working with the Tampa Bay Abortion Fund to think about, for the clients that, who speak English as, a second language, or maybe speak limited English and their API, how can we make sure that they access, the fund and be able to get abortion care? And also in Texas, what's really exciting, something that our chapter has been doing, led by members, is actually translating resources so that Texans can be able to access information about abortion care, and doing that in 6 different Asian languages.
Oh, wow.
And so that's something that we're wrapping up right now. We're almost done with the translation of the resource guide, and that will be something that we disseminate with our partners, including abortion funds and providers, as well as other AAPI organizations as well.
Yeah, that's great. Well, let us know how we at Repro can also help disseminate that and spread the word. We'll love to share links to this amazing work that you're doing. You are all so busy, and clearly the time is now for all this work. So thank you for all of that. And also for explaining how a lot of these, the way that anti-abortion bills can be particularly racist toward the AAPI community, in terms of the sex selective excuse that they use. So that's really important for listeners to be aware of and to know when you hear those narratives being talked about. And while it feels like a very devastating moment we are living in, and like you said, it is, there's a lot of uncertainty. We want to give listeners some sort of hope in various actionable ways or positive news that we can share on the Repro front. Sorry. Can you tell us about some of the most prominent AAPI political leaders that you've been working with or aligning with to champion specifically abortion access, but reproductive justice access as a whole? Like, who has been the most powerful voice in Congress that you can point to?
Yeah, so first off, I want to shout out Representative Pramila Jayapal.
Yes.
So we've worked with her and her office on numerous fronts, but especially around healthcare access and immigrant justice. And she's a champion for one of the bills that we're helping lead on the national level, which is called HEAL, the Health Equity and Access Under the Law Act. So just to give a little bit of context, so I've talked about this a little bit before, but Roe has always been the floor. So we have a legal right to abortion, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people have access to abortion. And so the path to abortion is particularly arduous for the AAPI communities for a number of reasons, but mainly that it's filled with language barriers, cultural stigmas, and then low rates of insurance coverage for our most vulnerable members. And so for thinking about the AAPI community, Asian Americans are overrepresented in frontline low-wage jobs. So it makes it difficult or impossible to get time off of work and money for transportation and overnight accommodations to travel for an abortion. And that's going to be exponentially the case with the Dobbs decision. People will need to travel like 1,000 times, 2,000 times the amount of distance that they would have had to, travel under Roe. And for states like Texas, they have to travel upward 500 miles to find the nearest clinic.
Crazy.
And so for Asian Americans, particularly, so many who work in frontline low-wage jobs, that's just going to be an enormous hurdle. 6 in 10 Asian Americans are immigrants, and 16% are undocumented. And so the criminalization of abortion heightens fears of adverse immigration consequences for undocumented individuals, refugees, and other immigrants, regardless of their immigrant status. And then 66% of Asian Americans and 30% of Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders speak a language other than English at home. And so that means that they experience difficulties for accessing healthcare due to language barriers. Related to the first point, again, as I was saying, Asian Americans face economic hurdles and immigration barriers, as well as, the centuries-old cultural stigmas that discourage conversations about reproductive health. And so, where this all kind of like, I'm going somewhere with this.
I know.
Where this
all good info.
Right. Where this, kind of, coalesces is that it's to understand that Roe has always been the floor. And so for low-income individuals and immigrants to access abortion care, we need Roe, but then we also need a few other policy solutions. And so first, we need the EACH Act, which stands for Equal Access for Abortion Coverage. And this would remove the Hyde Amendment and related abortion restrictions and allow federal healthcare programs, including Medicaid, to cover abortion care. And then, in addition to EACH, we would also need the HEAL Act, which, Representative Jayapal is championing. And the HEAL Act, Health Equity and Access Under the Law, would allow immigrants to access to federal healthcare programs. And so back when I was talking about reproductive justice and gave the example of the Korean woman, the Korean immigrant woman, she's not able to access, contraception or abortion care because of her immigration status. She has to wait 5 years after getting her green card. And so the 5-year bar, the 5-year waiting period is an enormous barrier for immigrants and their families to access healthcare, and in particular, reproductive healthcare. And so the HEAL Act would remove that 5-year bar, as well as open up access to the ACA marketplace for undocumented immigrants. So that's something that Representative Jayapal is leading. And then I also want to shout out Representative Judy Chu, who's leading with the Women's Health Protection Act in the House, which would protect abortion rights nationwide. And then finally, I also want to shout out Florida State Representative Anna Escamani, who represents Orange County. So that's the Orlando area in Florida. She is the first Iranian American in the Florida State Legislature, and she's also a champion for reproductive justice, and has always shown up time and time again for reproductive justice.
I mean, that's really great in a state like Florida. I mean, Rep. Judy Chu is from my home state, California, and Rep. Jayapal is from Washington. But when you see someone in a state like Florida or in Texas, it's really admirable to see them standing up and creating that pathway forward. So thank you for sharing about those leaders. I think it's really, really important. And I love how you said Roe is the floor. And I remember reading an article by Monica Simpson from Sister Song in the New York Times recently, and she said the same thing. Roe is the floor, the mountaintop is reproductive justice. And so I think it all brings that back together. This is what we need to aim for. Look at how tenuous Roe has been for years and years and years. And now we really need to find a new path forward. And I think that is through the justice framework. What are some positive, actionable steps people can take to champion reproductive justice and abortion access, especially for the AAPI community? And how can listeners get involved and support NAPAWF and the work you're doing?
Yeah, great question. So I want to start off by saying, again, validating how people might be feeling in this moment, that there's a lot of despair and, anger, rage, and sadness and confusion that we're all holding. And I think that's important to acknowledge. And also, I always think about this quote from the Black abolitionist organizer, Miriam Kaba, who says that we have to practice hope as a discipline. And it's a muscle that we need to strengthen every day. And the reason why I love that quote so much is that particularly when we hear about, dogs, when we hear about the leak and, just everything that's going around in the world right now.
Oklahoma bill, and it's just one after the other.
Right. Yeah. There's just so much going on in the world that it's really easy for us to fall into despair and to lose hope. But the thing that, is really hard, and actually the thing that we need to do, is to find hope in every single thing, to be able to find the joy and find compassion in people, and that being the basis in which we can, then build hope, because I think that hope, it can be such a powerful thing. And so I just want to start off with that beautiful quote.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
I would say that the first thing, particularly for any listeners who are Asian American and Pacific Islander, to sign NAPAWF's Abortion Access Solidarity Statement, which they can do at napawf.org/abortion solidarity. And I'm sure that Asha, your team will drop that link.
Yes, we will share the link. Absolutely.
But yeah, we would really love for, folks to sign our solidarity statement. And we're having, our partners on the national and local level and state level to also sign as well, because we really want to show that, again, we have the stats to show that 7 in 8 Asian Americans, and then also 85% of AAPI women support abortion access. We have the data, but we also want to send a message that, there are thousands and thousands of AAPIs who support abortion access. and who oppose, whatever decision that comes out with Dobbs. And we're going to mobilize and we're going to organize your communities to take action. So we want to show our power that, all these people, we support abortion access. And so that, I would say, first step. And then from there, what NAPAWF is also doing is we're soon going to be releasing a toolkit that will have messaging guidance, social media assets, resources on mobilizing organizing tactics, as well as how to talk about abortion in AAPI communities. Very exciting.
Right. Yes.
Calls to action, which looks like, what our chapters across the country and our members are doing to take action. And so that toolkit will probably be on the same website, napawf.org/abortion solidarity. And we'll have, that range of, resources and calls to action so that people can really easily get plugged in. So I would say in less than a month, be on the lookout for that because we'll update that soon.
And you have a newsletter that people can sign up to on the website to get all the updates about everything you're doing as well, correct?
Yes. And then the last thing is for folks to become members of NAPAWF, which they can do at napawf.org/membership. And the reason why I say this is that now more than ever, we really need to organize our communities. We really see a post-Roe world as, a long-term strategy that, there's going to be so much activity that's going to happen after the decision comes out and, in the next month and 2 months. So during the summer, there's so much that's going to happen that people may feel very overwhelmed. And also we need to be able to, again, practice hope as a discipline and preserve our energy. And the way that we can do that is to start having these conversations about reproductive justice in our family. And the number one way that I would really, have folks be able to start doing that is by meeting people where they're at. So that might be using, Cold Wall as, a starting point. That might be, trying to understand where their values lie. And I think particularly in having conversations about abortion and just reproductive, healthcare in general, it's really important that we make it rooted in shared values. That, for example, my parents may not have been pro-abortion 10, 15 years ago, but we have a shared value of we want to be able to, raise our families in safe and sustainable communities. And the way that we need to do that is by making sure that people have the ability to make decisions over their own lives, because we ultimately know what's best for ourselves. And so, there's so much stigma attached to abortion. And there's so many different ways we talk about abortion in our community using coded language. So it's really important that, beyond abortion, beyond reproductive health rights, justice, that at the end of the day, we root it in shared values and then the actual stories that we hold. There's something that, in a lot of repro spaces we talk about is that we want to really emphasize the fact that everyone loves someone who's had an abortion. And prior to that conversation in September that I had with my mom, I really just, knew of the friends that I loved who have had abortions. But I didn't realize that someone so close to me, my mom, had an abortion too. And I think that's really important to think about, that we all love someone who's had an abortion. And at the end of the day, no matter what their situation is, if we had a loved one who needed to get care, we would do everything in our power to make sure that they would get care. And so I think that's something that's so important. And that's one way that we can start, pushing the needle forward, that, again, this is a long-term vision that we have towards reproductive justice, and a way for us to incrementally build power and to create a world that actually, has reproductive justice, where we achieve reproductive justice. In order for us to get there, we need to practice hope as a discipline, and we also need to organize our communities.
I love that. I could just listen to you talk all day because it just gives me hope, and I'm inspired to go and do these things. So yes, like Marianne Carver said, practice hope as a discipline. And shout out to Renee Bracey Sherman from We Testify, who coined the term, everybody loves someone who's had an abortion. And I think it just really brings it back home to, what the discourse should really be about. It should be rooted in love and compassion. And that idea of shared values that you said, I think that's so crucial, because that is how we connect with people and find that common ground and then move forward and hopefully move toward a more progressive human rights agenda. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. And like we said, we're going to be sharing all the links, all the ways people can get involved. And please keep us posted in the future if there's any other ways that we can amplify the work of NAPAWF and, leading up to the Dobbs decision and the midterms and beyond. There's so much going on that, people just want maybe even bite-sized pieces of action that they can take. And so that's what the Repro Periodical is all about. And so we want to equip people with as much as they can take on and, take some steps forward. So practice hope as a discipline. I love that.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for having me. And I'm really looking forward to how we can continue building power together.
Well, Seri, thank you so much for joining me today. And appreciate all the work that you're doing, and keep fighting the good fight. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to watch Cold War by heading to reprofilm.org, sign up for our periodical if you haven't already, and join Seri and the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum team by heading to www.napawf.org/abortion solidarity. Sign their solidarity letter, help amplify AAPI voices in the reproductive justice conversation, and find your local NAPAWF chapter for more ways to get involved. The Repro Film Podcast is executive produced by Mama Film, hosted and produced by me, Asha Dyer, edited by Kylie Brown, with original music by Paris Jane and Maurice Anthony. Our monthly periodical is programmed by Neha Aziz and written by Emily Christensen. Thank you to all our Repro podcast listeners for joining me during AAPI Heritage Month, and I look forward to bringing you our next conversation. Bye for now.